Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I have to tell you, ladies, watching General Hospital these past few weeks has been quite the emotional journey for me. As a man who has lived through his fair share of seasons, who has seen the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in this unpredictable life, I always try to look at these characters as if they are my very own neighbors. I sit here in my favorite armchair watching the screen, and right now my heart is just breaking into a million little pieces for Drew Kane. I mean, have you seen how far this poor man has fallen into this dark downward spiral? It is genuinely tough to witness a man lose his way so completely. He used to be such a beacon of light, a man of profound honor and deep-rooted kindness. But lately, he is acting as stubborn as a Missouri mule. He has become so incredibly bitter, so completely closed off from the rest of the world, and it feels like his heart has turned entirely to solid ice. It is almost ironic, is it not? He is acting just like his twin brother's famous moniker, Stone Cold. But unlike Jason, who always carried a quiet, protective strength, Drew's coldness feels like it is born out of pure, unadulterated pain and a deep, festering anger that he just cannot seem to shake. When I sit back and really think about everything this good man has been through over the last few years, it honestly sends a shiver down my spine. We are talking about a man who was violently thrown into a waking nightmare. He was locked away in a terrible, dark prison, beaten mercilessly until he was barely holding on to life, and completely stripped of his dignity and freedom. For the longest time, every single person in Port Charles, including his own precious family, thought he was dead and gone. They mourned him, they wept for him, and they tried their best to move on with their lives. When a human being endures that kind of extreme physical and emotional torture, it fundamentally changes the very fabric of their soul. You learn to build massive, impenetrable walls around your heart just to survive the day. I have seen it in real life, folks. When life knocks a man down repeatedly, sometimes the only way he knows how to stand back up is to put on a heavy suit of armor and push everyone away. That is exactly what Drew is doing right now. He thinks he is protecting himself from further harm, but in reality, he is just isolating himself from the very people who have the power to heal his broken spirit. But here is the beautiful truth about family, and this is something I hold very dear to my own heart as a father. No matter how thick that armor gets, a child's pure love can pierce right through it like a ray of sunshine breaking through a stormy sky. And that brings me to the sweetest, most vital part of this entire complicated situation. His precious, beautiful little daughter, Scout Kane. Let me tell you, there is absolutely nothing in this world quite like the sacred bond between a father and his little girl. I know from my own life experiences that a daughter can look at her father, even when he is at his absolute worst, even when he is making terrible mistakes, and still see the hero he used to be. Scout is that singular ray of hope for Drew right now. She might be young, but my goodness, she is incredibly perceptive. Children always absorb so much more of their environment than we adults give them credit for. They feel the heavy tension in the room. They notice the hidden sadness in our eyes, and they remember the pain even when we try our hardest to shield them from it. It absolutely astounds me how much little Scout remembers about her family's history, and I truly believe it is going to shock Drew to his very core when he realizes it. Do you remember when they lost Oscar Nero, Drew's beloved son? That was one of the most profoundly heartbreaking tragedies I have ever watched unfold on this show. Losing a child is a suffocating grief that no parent on this earth should ever have to bear. It goes against the natural order of life. I still get a heavy lump in my throat just thinking about how the Quartermain family, in all their usual chaotic, loud glory, completely stopped their bickering and came together. They created that special, comfortable room in the mansion for Oscar to spend his final days in peace, surrounded by love. It was a remarkably beautiful act of family unity. Scout was just a tiny little thing back then, maybe 3 or 4 years old at the most. You would naturally think a child that young would forget, that the traumatic memories would just fade into the blurry background of childhood. But she remembers the profound sadness that hung in the air. She remembers the overwhelming love they poured into Oscar. And most importantly, she remembers exactly who her father was before the cruel world broke him. I truly believe that when she brings up those memories of Oscar, it is going to hit Drew like a runaway freight train. It is going to force him to look in the mirror and ask himself if this bitter, angry man is the father that Oscar would have wanted him to be. And we certainly cannot talk about Drew's current fragile state of mind without talking about the sheer physical trauma he recently endured. My goodness, when Nina Reeves pushed him into that water in such a rude, reckless manner, I nearly jumped right out of my chair. It was such a shocking, unnecessary moment of cruelty. But what breaks my heart even more than the fall itself is what happened right before that terrible incident. Drew was in such an incredibly vulnerable state, paralyzed, unable to move a single muscle, and unable to speak a single word. He was essentially trapped inside a prison of his own body. And yet, in that agonizing moment of complete helplessness, little Scout came to him with such a pure, innocent request. She looked at her father with those big, hopeful eyes and asked the one thing every child of a fractured, complicated family desperately wants. She asked if everyone could just get along. She wanted peace between him, her brother Danny Morgan, Jason, the wealthy Quartermains, and even her mother's side of the family with Alexis and Molly. And what did Drew do in response? He blinked yes. That single, silent blink was a monumental promise. It was a desperate father telling his little girl that he would try, that he still cared. It proves to me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the good, loving, honorable Drew is still alive in there, buried deep underneath all that defensive anger. Then came that miraculous, unforgettable day when he finally regained his ability to speak and his physical mobility. Oh, what a joyous, triumphant moment that was. I vividly remember watching the scene where he showed up at Alexis Davis's house. Molly Lansing Davis was there, and the atmosphere was just so thick with anticipation and disbelief. And then Scout ran to the door when she threw her little arms around him, bursting into happy tears, and cried out, "Daddy, you're home." Well, I do not mind admitting to you all that I shed quite a few tears myself right here in my living room. That is the kind of pure, unfiltered, unconditional love that has the power to save a man's soul from the brink of destruction. In that warm embrace, he was not a broken ex-convict. He was not a bitter man seeking petty revenge. He was simply a father holding his entire world in his arms. Now, the journey to true healing is never a straight, easy line, and Drew obviously still has a very long, bumpy road ahead of him. His stubbornness is a tough nut to crack. But thankfully, he has some genuinely good people in his corner, even if he does not always want to admit it or accept their help. Take his brother Jason, for example. Jason knows a thing or two about having to start over from scratch and leaving the darkness of the past behind. When Jason looked Drew in the eye and told him that it was time to start a brand new chapter, it was a moment of profound, quiet, brotherly advice. It was Jason extending an olive branch, trying to pull his twin back from the edge of the abyss. And then there is young Danny Morgan. I have to say, I am so incredibly impressed by that boy's maturity and courage. He actually stood up to the formidable Tracy Quartermain. We all know Tracy can be as tough as old boots, fiercely protective of her family's legacy and notoriously difficult to persuade. But Danny, with the wisdom of someone much older, managed to convince her to let Drew come and watch Scout continue her swim practice. That took real guts and a deep love for his sister. Of course, Tracy being Tracy, she could not just make it easy. She had to set her strict conditions and maintain her control. They reached a firm compromise. She stated that Drew was only allowed to attend if Scout was physically accompanying him. It is a very strict boundary, but honestly, looking at it from an outsider's perspective, it might be exactly what Drew needs right now. He needs to be forced to focus entirely on his daughter, to put her needs and her presence above his own selfish grievances. So the million-dollar question remains, can Scout actually pull this off? Can she be the one to finally convince this seemingly evil, hardened version of Drew to soften his stance? When she reminds him of that silent promise he made to her when he could only blink, when she reminds him that she desperately needs all of her family members in her life, I think it is going to break down his final defenses. She is not asking for money. She is not asking for power. She is just a little girl asking for her family to be whole. I am sitting here hoping and praying that this storyline goes exactly where I think it is going. Sometimes, folks, it takes the smallest, most innocent hands to reach down and pull us out of the deepest, darkest holes we dig for ourselves. Drew Kane has been through hell and back, and he has let the fire burn away a lot of his goodness. But as long as he has Scout looking up at him with that unconditional love, he has a lifeline. I am rooting for Drew to grab onto that lifeline with both hands, and I am rooting for that sweet little girl to finally get her real father back. What a truly beautiful, heartwarming story of redemption that would be for all of us to witness.